Hello, everyone. We are going to start the webinar at this point. Welcome to, I see there's a few people on already. Marie is on and Wanjiru is on. Welcome. We will probably find that a few folks will start joining as the webinar proceeds, but given the interest of time, we're going to start the webinar as soon as possible. So thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who can make it, this is the second of the job search webinars, and we had one earlier this term in about September. And we are very excited that we have an interesting format for this webinar in which we will be conducting an interview for the first time with a job candidate from last year, Marie Shabaya, and she will be joining us shortly. Just to start the webinar, I'm actually going to give a brief overview before we start the webinar on the job search process and recap what we discussed last time, and also focus on what exactly the topic will be during the interview. So we'll be giving you an overview of 3 phases of the job search: planning, executing, and closing your job search. In the last webinar, we discussed planning for your job search, which encompassed understanding your strengths and weaknesses, etc. And we'll give a quick recap of the main bullet points around planning for your job search and when it should be conducted for the most part. However, this webinar will focus very much on the execution piece, and that is what Marie will be speaking about in regards to her experience last year. So we'll start by recapping what we discussed the last time at a very high level. So as you can see, hopefully on your screen, the job search comprises 3 main segments. One is planning for the job search, the second is executing the job search, and the third is closing the job search. And the first piece, as I mentioned, is very much about personal introspection and research, and it happens before you graduate, about 10 months before you graduate, conducting your SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on what your interests are, and also importantly, starting to research on options. Many of you that are listening to this live and on the recording will have either conducted this research already. We have, for example, asked you to identify organizations that you'd be interested in working with and provide this information to your ACN coordinator or career counselor. And that is imperative to actually start the job search in earnest. The focus, however, of this webinar will be on the execution component. So we are now roughly between 3 and 6 months before different people graduate on average. And we are in the phase where many ACN coordinators are conducting or doing brief introductions to the prospective organizations of your interest, as you've outlined, as well as mentors to give you a good sense of what the field that you might be interested in is about, and just generally how to get involved and better informed about a specific industry. The key principles of this would be twofold: persistence and professionalism, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, and Marie and Bernadetta will also be going into that in much more detail. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that and give you just a brief overview of what it means to execute the job search. So as I mentioned, this is when we will conduct, based on your initial list of companies that you'd be interested in working for, ACN will make targeted introductions to organizations as well as possible mentors. And we have mentioned in the past that we have very valuable relationships to a whole host of organizations, and this personalized interaction is actually quite critical to your success in the job search in general. Rather than sending your CV to a online recruitment portal where you don't have any connections, etc., and you don't have a personal champion who might be able to advocate on your behalf, ACN coordinators have actually taken the time to develop relationships with each of these organizations to cultivate relationships for each of them personally for ACN users. Bear with us as we have some technical difficulties. Apologies for the technical difficulties. The second piece that we'd like to emphasize around executing the job search is very much around customized prep. We are keen on making sure that you are very ready for any introductions that we do make and ongoing follow-up. So a key portion of this is around helping you with emails, just in terms of how to write an email in response to an introduction, something that Bernadetta and Marie will cover. How to prepare for interviews, specifically around case prep interviews for those of you that are doing consulting work, and how to conduct mentorship conversations, to be very specific in your ask, to have specific questions that you need help with, etc. And then the last piece, which as I mentioned, 2 principles to abide by would be persistence on the one hand and professionalism on the other. So the reason we mention both is that it does require, once you have been made have been introduced to an organization, you do need to be persistent and follow up, because sometimes these emails can get sidelined in the busy everyday aspects of life, and it is up to you to drive that conversation and follow up. However, you cannot then become an annoyance to the person that you've been introduced to, so you have to be professional and polite as much as possible. So while follow-up is key, be sure to get some feedback in terms of how to follow up. Importantly, keep everyone copied in terms of any sort of follow-up, such that your ACN coordinator is not chasing you to say, has this introduction been followed up on, or have you heard back, etc., etc. And then importantly, just continue to attend networking events to potentially meet the people that we introduce you to. Perfect example is last week we had Wharton's Africa Business Conference. A few of you have been introduced already to organizations that were actually at the conference. Perfect opportunity for you to put a face to a name and actually introduce yourself in person. So this is at a very high level, some summary lessons learned about executing the job search. And before I go any further, I'd like to introduce you to your host today, and that is Bernadetta Mshana, who is ALA class of 13. She's going to be graduating next year. She's originally from Tanzania, and she's the intern here at Africa Couriers Network, where she handles everything from small research projects to a whole host of activities. She's currently pursuing her A-levels, and she, as you can see in her bio, she was Secretary General of United Nations Clubs in Tanzania, at the Youth of United Nations Association in Tanzania, and was also a huge active member of Tanzania Youth Vision Association. Her big areas of interest are education and youth development, and possibly media as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to your host for today, Bernadetta.
Hello everyone. Today I'll be interviewing Ms. Marie Shabaya, who is a graduate from the University of Durham in the United Kingdom, where she earned her honors degree in economics. Marie is Kenyan, but she was raised in the United Arab Emirates. She was part of the ALA inaugural class and finished her master's degree in journalism at Columbia Journalism School. Ms. Shabaya?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me? Hi. Apologies, I needed to check. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. My first question would be, would you say there are other things to prepare before a person starts the job search, mentally, physically, or emotionally, besides the documents like resume and cover letter?
Yeah, definitely. You need to define the direction that you're choosing to go, especially in, well, I really could speak about my job search within the journalism space. And before we officially started the job search, I sat down and I understood what it was I wanted to do, or what it was I could do, given my experience and my strengths and my interests. I made a list of all the media houses, of all the newspapers and organizations I'd be interested in working in. And I also defined the kind of journalism I wanted to do. I was happy doing in radio. I wasn't too sure about working in television. But, you know, once I started talking to people, I had those kind of elements further defined. Yeah.
So once you had,
But I think you also need to,
hello,
yes?
once you have conducted your research and identified the job you wanted, and were introduced to different companies, what were some of the things you felt you did right?
The things that I felt I did right was that I was really very honest from the onset. So I didn't build an image of myself that I wanted to sell, so to speak. I was very upfront. I said, you know, I'm just graduating. I have very little experience, but these are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. Where can we improve on? And I think the initial introductions were more or less conversations about what I should expect from a journalism career, which was a very good thing now that I look back at it in hindsight.
So for companies that you didn't hear back from and you applied a job with them, how did you effectively follow up without losing the professional edge?
Well, you just send gentle reminders, more or less. It's quite informal in the journalism space. You reach out to editors you'd be working under directly, so I just, you know, send emails checking if, you know, the position had been filled or if, you know, I wasn't ready for the job. And a good thing to ask as well is very kindly ask what was wrong with my application. Like, you know, if you compare my application to the one that was successful, what were its shortcomings? So get feedback along the way if you can. That's very important as well.
So you're saying if I do not hear back from a company or I don't get the job offer, I can still keep in touch with them?
Yes, I mean, don't burn your bridges because eventually you might end up working for them. You know, maybe you're not a good fit for the position or the organization at this point in your career, but it doesn't mean it's the end. It will never happen. So you need to be good on those parts. Don't burn bridges before they're built, sort of thing. Yeah.
But then realizing how most companies require years of work experience, should I be targeting an entry-level job or is there another way of getting a job that I want?
Well, it depends really on the job that you want. So I would say if you understand what it requires, I think that's the first thing, understanding what it requires. And it really isn't experience at the end of the day they're looking for. They're looking for expertise. And usually this expertise in some industries is garnered over time. So it doesn't mean that, you know, you're inexperienced or you're not good enough to do this job. You just don't have the expertise yet to pursue that job.
Yeah, I understand that you're one of the people who got into the workspace as interns and then were offered a job afterwards. So how does one conduct themselves in a workspace to get the employers to notice them for a promotion or a permanent job offer?
Um, I think the best way to answer that, just do your best, basically, and leave a legacy. And make sure that they understand the quality of your work and how much you've contributed to this organization before and after. So, you know, if it's, say you're working for an NGO, you're making sure certain goals are met within your time there. But you need to set goals for yourself before you start an internship and understand fully what it is you want at the end of the day. Do you want experience or do you want a longer-term position? And in my case, I really wanted to stay after I was there a month. So we did have a conversation about it, and they actually hired me after I started the internship a month later. So I've been working as a full-time employee for the duration of my internship.
Okay. In your case, what are some of the trade-offs you had to make before you got to the job you wanted?
I think there was the trade-offs. I guess there were a lot of compromises. I was let down by a lot of organizations I really admired and really wanted to work with. And that was amazing.
Hello, Marie. Are you still with us? Okay, we're just experiencing technical difficulties, so bear with us. Marie, are you still with us?
Yes, yes I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we lost you a little bit, so maybe if you could recap your response to Bernadetta.
To the last question.
Yes.
Yes, the trade-offs. I was saying, basically, in my case, I traded off working for a smaller publication with a smaller circulation as opposed to a bigger newsroom. And I think that was a good thing in the end, whereas I wanted a bigger place to try and play around and grow in. Working for a smaller organization in a smaller newsroom gives you more opportunity and more responsibility. So at the end of the day, the trade-off happened to be a good thing.
Marie, before we allow questions, is there any advice or key learnings that you would like to share with anyone who's going through the job search process right now?
Basically, I just want to assure everyone that, yeah, everything does work out. I think that's my message at the end of the day. I remember myself, it was exactly a year ago, actually, that I began the job search, and it was quite an anxious time. And I think the more I point out that it does work out, if you do your homework and you're diligent, then the worry is really unsubstantiated for the most part. So don't worry, is my message.
To sort of give us a feel of the whole process for you, could you kindly recap narrate a story of how the job search process for you was like?
Well, it was more or less divided into three parts, as Shami showed us just before I came on. There is a planning phase. You sit down and you really think about what it is you want to commit yourself to and what you want from your career or the shape you want it to take. You know, make a list, understand the places you want to end up in, say, a year to 5 years, and then the introductions come along. I was introduced to several people by Fred, which really gave me the impetus to start understanding how the industry works, and you have to be diligent again with communication with people you're introduced to. Make sure you follow up, make sure you ask the right questions that are going to be good to you and them, and foster a relationship there. And the last part, it was at least a month before I made the move, I made sure I had all my documentation. We were applying for a visa. And I also made sure I had an official offer letter in my hands before I left. And to make accountability even stronger, I did submit a copy of that offer letter to my careers office at Columbia. So that helped kind of, you know, make sure that this is happening and everyone that I need to know knows that I'm starting this job in South Africa. So it's a fairly long process. It would have been around a year. It wasn't a year. It was 9 months of really start to finish.
At this point, we're going to open up for questions, and I know there's a couple of you on the call, so if you can type up your questions and let us know, we will ask both Marie as well as Bernadetta to reflect on the questions and respond. So please send in your questions. And you can direct your questions to either Marie or to ACN more broadly as well. If you don't know how to type in a question, there should be a panel on your right where there are questions. There's a little panel or a dialog box where you can type in your question, and you can request that you ask a question, and then we'll read it out for you on your behalf. Looks like a couple of you have difficulties or connection problems, so I'm not sure if that is also contributing to this. But let's just take a quick poll to see if there's any questions. We have a question from Vivian.
Marie, do you see yourself remaining at the job you have now? How important is the first job in the grand scheme of things?
I will stay for long as in a year to 2 years. And it's quite important because to me the first job is an extension of my education, of my training. I'm still learning. You know, every time I write a piece or I edit a piece, we go through it with my editors and they say, you should have done this, you should have exercise in building myself as a better writer and a better journalist.
Great. Having been part of your job search process myself, Marie, I'm happy to ask a question as well, and that's how you leveraged your peer network process, both just your general network and your peer network in materializing some of the job prospects. Because I know that you did use some of your peers and also are now currently living with a fellow ALA graduate. So I think it would be interesting to say, okay, how did you think of your network and how did you use that in the process of getting a job and then finding yourself in a situation that was in terms of the living situation and also handling all the logistics thereof?
Yeah, it was quite good. I think the ALA network, given that we all stayed connected somewhat and you facilitated a lot of the introductions and connections, the ALA network gave me some confidence about Johannesburg and working full time. I haven't worked in Johannesburg, but I felt like I had a support system there. And even, you know, my roommate Spencer, we live together and work in the same building. So it does make, it made it a lot easier deciding to move back to Johannesburg as a journalist. It was a good way to start. And my peer networks in Colombia, a lot of them look through my CV, look through a lot of my essays and help me put together a portfolio. We picked the pieces that would sell me best. So I got a lot of advice for my friends at Columbia about, you know, what to put forward as, you know, example pieces of what I could do. And also my professors as well on moving to Johannesburg and helping me try and figure out what the shape of my career would be 5 years from now, you know, the possibilities apart from the first job. So I got a wealth of information from people around me. And I think that's one thing I'm glad to my networks for.
Marie, if you could redo the process of what is the one thing that you would do differently?
One thing that I'd do differently, I think I would have been, I was very under.
We've lost Marie for a second. Hold on, bear with us while we get her back. Marie, can you hear us? Marie, are you still with us?
Hello?
Great, we can hear you again.
Great, great. Yes, I think I lost my train of thought. But yeah, what was the question that was asked last?
If you could redo the process of searching for a job, what is the one thing that you would do differently?
Yes, as I was saying, I would have been more confident from the start. Uh, I would have been, I think, more forceful with some of the job prospects I pursued on my own, and with some help. And I think that's one of the major lessons I learned. If I was more confident or more forward in my questioning, I think things would have been different, but I don't really have any major regrets or any major redos that I would have done, but I would have been more confident.
Mm-hmm. Marie, this is probably just one more question before I think we can wrap up, but if you had advice on how to best showcase your abilities, I know you took quite a lot of pains in preparing your portfolios, et cetera, last year and sending it to different people, customizing it accordingly. What advice would you give to people who are engaging in the same process? Granted, the journalism field is particular in looking at writing samples, etc. But what kind of advice would you give that would best showcase someone's abilities in over and above, say, the CV and a cover letter?
Oh yes, I think nowadays we live a lot of our lives online, and if you have any sort of presentation that you gave or paper you presented or video you are in or audio you have been, you could actually attach that to your LinkedIn profile, and I've been doing that too. And a lot of people say that gives us more of an idea of who you are. We saw you doing these things, or we saw your work. So I think if you could use the web, social media, to really put yourself out there, but not in a cocky way, but just in an honest, earnest way, that would be good. That's a lesson that I learned. Also, just, again, when I say you're introduced to people and you build a relationship, if you could sustain that to the point where you're explaining to the person you're introduced to how much of an impact you've had or the things you've done, and they really are impressed, they will definitely put you forward for anything they hear. So it's a two-pronged process through relationships, in my view, and online.
Terrific. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to conclude the interview component of the presentation. Thank you so much, Marie, and thank you very much, Bernadetta, for conducting the interview. It was really helpful to hear you both, and I think hopefully it was helpful to the audience as well. I will conclude on a couple of quick pointers and next steps before we wrap up this session, and would like to just outline that and emphasize what Marie has been saying all along, and what we have been also emphasizing through the Facebook group, the Weekly Digest, and many other channels of communication. Please reach out to organizations on your list that have been introduced to you through your ACN coordinator. Please CC your coordinator as much as possible, because that makes it easier for us to follow up on. Attend any events where you're likely to meet people in the sector of your interest. This is, again, to put faces to names. You never know who may be showing up. And generally, this is not on the slide, but we really encourage you to just be responsive. So if emails are made, or introductions have been made, or emails have been sent to you, please respond. And if you do not respond in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, it's much harder for us to then proceed or help advocate your case. If you know that you are going to be in an area of limited connectivity or you do not have a connection, we also strongly encourage you to put an out of office, just so people are aware that you may not be responsive and that you have a plan to get respond back. This is very much because we often are tasked with, employers who want an interview overnight or a response immediately, and it's always helpful when you are immediately responsive as well. We have situations, for example, as recently as last week, when recruiters were trying to get in touch with people who weren't responsive for 48 hours and then potentially missed an opportunity to interview with a recruiter in their home school. So we just encourage you to very much respond to your emails. And then wanted to let you know that we have a few more webinars coming up as well. The next webinar will be around interning with nonprofits on the 20th of November, and we're very pleased that two of our ASEAN Community MasterCard Foundation scholars will actually be leading this webinar, so please stay tuned for that. And we'll also be conducting additional webinars in the next few months, similar to the ones that have been conducted on consulting, finance, etc. So thank you very much again for attending, everyone, and we look forward to your participation in the next webinar. From us at ASEAN, thank you all, and bye-bye.